as the new year dawns, a look at the stories, the people, and the controversies that captured the headlines in 2014, and a look ahead to the new year, a world-over review of the year that was and the year ahead. Stay right there.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Happy New Year. I'm Raymond Arroyo. I'm very pleased to welcome to our World Over Year in Review, Year Ahead Special, an old friend, Robert Royal, who is the editor of thecatholicthing.org. You know, it's said that to know where you're going, you have to know where you've been. And that's what this hour is all about, to give you their thoughts on 2014 and what you could expect in 2015. We're also joined via satellite from New York by Father GERALD MURRAY, pastor of the Church of the Holy Family, and sitting next to him right there, the president of the Catholic League, Dr. William Donohue. Gentlemen, thank you for all of you for being with us.
Great to be with you.
I want to start with Pope Francis. Now, he made two very significant visits outside of Italy this year. Of course, he made a number of them. Went to Korea, went to a number of places. But I want to focus on the Holy Land visit in May. And at the end of November, he went to Turkey. Those two visits, there was a lot of news made, and there was an ecumenical dimension. You'll remember Christian unity was stressed time and time again. And there accompanying the Pope was Bartholomew I, the Orthodox Patriarch. The significance of this double act, if you will, and then let's talk about some of the news coming out of Turkey, particularly. Robert Royal.
Well, it's wonderful that he does this because, of course, the Christians in the Middle East right now are the most suffering group of Christians in a long time, since communism and fascism and Nazism deliberately set out to persecute Christianity. So it's an opportunity. It's one that he played, I think, rather well. You could criticize how the whole thing plays out, but everything is so complicated in the Middle East, you can hardly ever say that anything goes perfectly. Yeah. I think that the tightrope walk about that dimension of persecution, the attempt to bring together the two sides in Israel, the attempt to talk with the president of Turkey about his good reception of people who are fleeing persecution, but also the need to do something more for the Christians in the Middle East. All these are steps forward. They will take a while to bear some fruit, but it's a good beginning.
Bill Donohue, were you surprised at the Pope's audacity, if you will, demanding that the Muslim world condemn this violence and make it clear that one can never kill in the name of God?
Well, I was to some extent, and I'll tell you why. Pope Benedict, I thought, spoke eloquently and very directly on this subject. It was highly criticized. Let's face it, I think Pope Francis is a more popular pope, at least in some quarters, than Pope Benedict, and therefore he gets a little more leeway with these kind of comments. But I appreciate his direct talk, his straight talk. It was much needed.
Father Jerry, you want to comment on this at all?
Well, I was very happy that the Pope also met with the Patriarch of Constantinople precisely to highlight the role of Eastern Christianity in this whole question. And the quest for unity of all Christians is so important. This Pope is very intent on that. But actually, the Greek Orthodox suffer a lot in Turkey. In Constantinople, they have very little freedom. They're demanding the reopening of their seminary. And the moral influence of the Pope is very important. And quite frankly, with Turkey, there's a lot of questions where it's going. I'm glad the Pope made his presence felt there.
There was also this Israeli-Palestinian peace summit at the Vatican with Mahmoud Abbas and Shimon Peres. This didn't exactly bear the fruit that I think the Pope was looking for. Following it, we saw that terrible conflagration there along the borders. But he's clearly trying to insert himself and help shape these international events. Is it working?
Well, this is his typical modus operandi. He loves to bring people together to at least get them talking. Some of the wags said it was funny that he invited those two to pray with him at the Vatican.
Both
and it appears that neither of them really believes in God, and so that may have gotten. Well, he's the type of guy who actually thinks that may get them thinking a little bit about their ultimate destiny. But, you know, I want to give him a little bit of space here because these are intractable situations. We don't expect these age-long conflicts to be resolved in short order. And so he's stepped in and he got some people talking, and we'll see if it goes any further.
Father Jerry Murray, I want to pitch this to you. In April, you and Robert Royal and myself were present at those canonizations of two great 20th century popes, John Paul II and John the 23rd. What was the significance, do you think, of those two men being raised to the altar at the same time?
Well, they represented the force of Christianity confronting the crumbling 20th century after the Second World War, and then the rise of communism and its intractable attack on the Christian world. And in many ways, we saw the fruition of divine grace with the collapse of communism during the pontificate of John Paul II. Beyond that, though, there's a general theme that both of those popes brought out, which is that the modern world is in so many troubles because we reject God. And John Paul II was very, very clear. You know, he said that God reveals man to man. So if man doesn't know God, he doesn't even know himself. He becomes an inhuman creature. He really brought a message, both of those popes, that God is the only answer to what's happening in the 20th century.
I want to mention the presence of Benedict XVI at these canonizations, and throughout the year we've seen him pop up at different moments. The Synod on the Family, before that started. Pope Benedict keeps reappearing. Robert Royal, one of the best-selling books in Italy right now, actually questions whether Benedict resigned properly and the subsequent election of Pope Francis. The impact of having two popes essentially on the stage, or what seems to be two popes.
Yeah, I think one of the things very few people appreciate is how much of a continuity there is between Benedict and Pope Francis. When Pope Francis was at World Youth Day in Rio de Janeiro, he actually said, you know, Benedict is out there watching us, Benedict, and then the crowd started to take up this chant. He's very much in continuity with that Pope in terms of, I think, doctrine, that he understands the doctrine that was developed in the papacies of John Paul II and of Benedict was the necessary thing for the Church to produce. Now, his pastoral approach is a different one. He tries to bring in all sides of the Church. We saw that in the fact that he canonized both John Paul II and John the 23rd on the same day. I myself noted that in the documents in the Synod, it began with the Instrumentum Laboris actually quoted from Paul VI's Humanae Vitae on contraception and said how prophetic it was. And then he beatified Paul VI at the end of the Synod. So people, they read a stray remark here and there, and all of us, of course, get a little bit worried when he seems to be going off message. But there's a tremendous continuity there, and there's a friendship between those men.
I want to get into the Synod in a moment. Bill Donahue, your thoughts on the visual of having two popes there. We heard in recent days Pope Benedict saying he'd prefer to go by Father Benedict. This is the first I've heard of this. He said he was too weak at the time to lobby for that title, but that's his preference now. Is that a reaction, do you think, from people raising the question about two popes?
Well, yeah, but I also would think, look, there's an analogy in this country for that matter. I mean, George W. Bush doesn't speak out about President Obama. Dick Cheney will speak out to some extent. I think people respect these lines. But, you know, I agree with what Bob just said, that there's more continuity here between the two popes than some people would be willing to admit. However, I want to say this. I mean, I don't think that Benedict has gotten a fair shake by a lot of the people who are laying all these wreaths at the foot of Pope Francis. A lot of the same things that Pope Francis did, for example, in reaching out to people, and a lot of his moral teachings and the like, were done exactly by Pope Benedict. But he doesn't seem to get the same type of awards, and I think that's not fair to him.
Father Jerry, before I let this topic go, the presence of Pope Benedict at all these events, it is confusing for some. I often get emails, I get calls. It's a weird moment, they say, having two popes on the scene. And I tell them, look, there's really only one pope here. But still, the impression is that there are two.
Well, quite frankly, I think it's an impression created by the fact that Pope Benedict, Pope Emeritus Benedict, is wearing a white cassock. I really think that was a mistake. It was done out of respect and love, but it would have been much better if he resumed wearing a black cassock. The reason being, there are never two popes. There can only be one pope. When he resigned the pontificate, he lost the office. So the symbolism doesn't conjoin with the reality, and that's a mistake. But again, it was done for good reasons, and I think now that he's been wearing it, we'll just leave it be. I don't think we should argue that question.
One of the most talked about actions by Pope Francis in 2014 was the apparent demotion of Cardinal Raymond Burke. Now, long before October's Synod on the Family, Burke became the lead spokesman for traditional church practice and treatment of divorced and remarried Catholics. Here is a bit of what he told me in an interview before the Synod.
If we don't take seriously every word of our Lord, I don't know who we are anymore. We're certainly not the church. We're not his mystical body. And secondly, to try to drive a wedge between discipline and doctrinal truth is simply false in the Catholic Church, because every discipline is at the service of a teaching or some sacred reality to safeguard it and to promote it. And that's why the Church has the discipline that she has. If it's being fundamentalist to hold strictly to the teaching on marriage, well, then I'm happy to be a fundamentalist.
Cardinal Burke was removed as prefect of the Apostolic Signatura and appointed patron of the Knights of Malta. Now, Pope Francis denied that this was a demotion. Your thoughts, Robert Royal?
Well, what he denied in a recent interview in La Nación is that this was a punishment for his speaking out in the Synod against the Casper proposal that divorced and remarried people who have not been annulled receive communion. This has been coming a long time. We knew this in the springtime that he was going to be leaving the Apostolic Signatura. He had already been removed from the Congregation for Bishops, which clearly indicates that somehow someone in the Holy See, and whether Francis himself or someone advising Francis, wanted to reduce the precedence of Raymond Burke in those decision processes. So it wasn't a punishment, but it's clear that somewhere along the way, this is a signal of a change of direction.
Father Jerry Murray, your reaction to this? I mean, this was not a surprise.
It was not a surprise, and in fact, it's something that we may regret happened, but we also may be happy, because now Cardinal Burke will have a lot of freedom to continue to do what he does so well, which is to speak, to write, and he will be having the kind of influence he's had so far. The Pope has complete discretion in who he names, and Cardinal Burke was very clear that he obeys willingly. The judgment on whether he should have continued in that job, that's debatable. The fact that he will do a lot of good from now on is not. He will.
Bill Donahue, Cardinal Walter Casper was really the resurrected man this year. After being criticized by the last two popes, Cardinal Casper's ideas have been embraced by Pope Francis. How big a deal do you think was that moment when Casper disparaged the Africans? He was speaking about gay unions at the Synod, and the whole African contingent rose up and said, wait a minute here, nobody's hearing our voice. What influence do you think that had on the last Synod, and what influence will it have on the Synod on the Family Part 2?
Well, first of all, I want to make it clear that there was some people were saying that Casper might have made a racist commentary there. There's nothing racist about it. However, thank God for Cardinal Napier and others for speaking out in a voice of moral clarity on this issue, because it did get very confusing to people, certainly here in the United States. And listen, they've got to deal. This is a serious problem here, because we know what happened in that interim report, don't we? And the kind of confusion that led to. And we need people like Burke, and we need people like Napier and others to speak out there. And these people who have a runaway train in terms of their ideas, we've seen where that's left the Protestant denominations and the mainline denominations. It's not been a very happy ending.
We should tell people the questionnaire has now gone out to the dioceses of the world. Robert Royal, in the questionnaire, it asks the bishops to comment on these questions, and it urges them not to respond by doctrine, but to respond with an eye toward pastoral care. What hand is being tipped here?
Oh, dear.
I just asked the questions, Robert.
As you know, I always have one answer about this. It seems to me that if you say we're going to start with pastoral care, it's like sending a doctor into the bedside of a gravely ill patient who's got a great bedside manner, but he doesn't know any medicine. So I don't know how. I think that it's this Pope's way, it's what he did in Argentina, is to first be in touch with the people who are hurting, to find out what's going on with them. But I think we all know that. And some people may take this as a indication to do something that maybe he doesn't intend. I think that's often the case with these misinterpretations about him. I think he just wants a candid survey of what's going on out there. I don't think that he will ever change doctrine, but practice itself will be something that is a different story.
Father Jerry and Bill Donahue, I'll ask both of you this. If you change doctrine, aren't you if you change practice, aren't you in essence changing doctrine?
Absolutely. Well, people act on the basis of what you teach them. If you teach them that mortal sin deprives you of communion, then you don't go to communion. Now, if you say you can go to communion, what you're teaching them is, well, adultery is no longer a mortal sin. Cardinal Casper and others have said we're trying to change practice, not doctrine. That's a complete dodge. Let's be clear about what's happening here. This is a revolutionary movement that Cardinal Casper has been pushing for more than 30 years. It was slapped down by Cardinal Ratzinger and Pope St. John Paul II. It's resurrected. It's really a destructive thing. And I can't speak more strongly because, unfortunately, the message doesn't seem to be getting into the heads of people. What Cardinal Casper proposes is unacceptable. There is no room for it in the Church.
Bill Donahue, how big a deal will this be?
And I can only say, well, I think it's a very big deal because it's the way things are interpreted. And we know that those people, for example, on the progressive side, so to speak, are going to take this and run with it. And just how far are they going to go? And that creates, again, the kind of confusion which leaves a lot of lay Catholics just nodding, you know, what's going on here? We're getting one set of signals from one side, another set of signals from the other side. Sure, there's got to be some room for people to interpret, but when you get to the kind of situation what we've seen already, I think it's going to create a lot of problems, and I think it's unnecessary.
Robert Royal, last word in this segment.
I think we just have to say openly that what we're talking about is giving communion to people who are in a sexual relationship with somebody they're not married to. And this is a very hard thing, as Father keeps insisting, to square with Catholic teaching and the plain words of our Lord. Now, the Pope is trying to reach out to these divorced and remarried people. He says it's awful that they can't distribute communion and they can't be lectors and several other things, and they're de facto excommunicated.
Godparents.
But I think what we have to say about this is even if the doctrine remains the doctrine, what people think the doctrine now is. Immediately after the announcement on the second Monday in the synod that we should be welcoming toward gays, my own daughter said to me that some of her friends were very happy because it looked like the Pope was saying that homosexuality is okay now. So that's the teaching, whatever the real teaching is, that's the effective teaching that begins to be present in public.
Okay, we'll leave it there, and it's going to be quite a ride to watch as that Synod on the Family rolls out next year. When we return, we'll discuss hot spots in other parts of the world, the rise of ISIS and the persecution of Christians, and much more. The World Over Year in Review and Year Ahead continues in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Year in Review, Year Ahead Special. I'm Raymond Arroyo, joined by Editor-in-Chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, and from New York, a priest of the Archdiocese there, Father Jerry Murray, and President of the Catholic League, Bill Donahue. I want to start with the big international story of the year. It had to be the rapid ascent of the Islamic State, or ISIS. They brutally persecuted the Christian minority in Iraq and Syria and really spread their version of jihad throughout the Middle East. Your take on what's driving ISIS and how will they shape the year to come, Bill Donahue?
I think they're in trouble, I'm glad to say, because now we're getting support from quarters we never expected as recently as 6 months ago. A lot of the Muslim-run nations have had it because they know while they may regard the United States and Israel to be the enemy, they also know that these people are so out of control that they have to be stopped. And so I am mildly optimistic that they may have met their match.
Robert Royal, your take.
Well, I'm a little less optimistic about this. I agree with Bill that the development in terms of the correlation of forces is fine. But, you know, to stop an operation like this, you need military force on the ground.
Yeah.
And even Pope Francis, when he said, you know, they need to be stopped, he qualified it and said, I don't mean bombed, that there needs to be some sort of international coalition that comes together to stop them. As we know, there is no possible international coalition unless led by the United States of America.
Right.
And we're unfortunately in a position in this country that is very unpopular, and understandably so, to send our own troops into a place like Iraq again. So while there are encouraging signs, there's some heavy lifting to be done here. And the moral case, I think, is absolutely clear. Unfortunately, the Vatican has to be sort of morally neutral and appreciate all sides. But I think that unless we get some decisive action on the part of the United States and some others, this is going to be a very ugly year coming up with ISIS.
Father Jerry Murray, we named last year the person of the year was the persecuted Christians in the Middle East. What will become of these people, do you think, in the new year? They are marginalized, they're on the run, and even the safe harbors they've had under the Assad regime in Syria, they're losing ground there as well.
The picture is pretty bleak when it comes to both Syria and Iraq, and this is regrettable, but I think it's something that we're going to have to think in terms of helping these refugees to be resettled elsewhere. My big concern right now is for Lebanon, which is, I think, in the target site of ISIS and people like that. Lebanon is where there's a significant Christian community, which has diminished over the years, but is still very strong. And that's a country where there's a lot of chaos in the political scene. Egypt is troubling too, but the government now, I think, is more responsive to the concerns of the Christians. But I feel a great solidarity with my Christian brothers over there in Iraq and Syria, and I agree, military force is absolutely justified and is necessary. I'm afraid, though, that we haven't seen the real resolute will from the president and his administration that are required.
Yeah, there's a mixed international message here. The policy, the United States policy on the ground is all over the place. I mean, in Syria, we were once arming the people who are now with ISIS. You know, now we're on the other side, but we're not quite, because we don't want to, you know, we're opposed to Assad. It's a crazy policy, and these poor Christians are really caught in the crossfire. Meanwhile, in Africa, Boko Haram continues to ravage Nigeria. Each week, they set off more bombs. They're kidnapping boys and girls and mothers, beheading fathers. Many of these people are Christian. Boko Haram-related violence has killed at least 4,000 people since their inception in the mid-90s. In April, over 200 teenage girls were kidnapped. Their whereabouts are still not known. Boko Haram claims they've been sold into slavery. What should the church do? What should the United States reaction be, Robert Royal?
Well, I think this is a much more difficult situation because we have, you can kind of line up the two teams in a place like Iraq or Syria somewhat. In this, it's a society-wide contagion. It's an infection. There's sort of this jihadist mentality that has permeated an entire culture. So we have to go in and rescue where we can when we can get good intelligence to do that. But I think that is going to be a long-term cultural struggle that is going to have to be played out.
Father Jerry Murray, it seems every day we're hearing more about Boko Haram blowing up a church, driving into a marketplace, or summarily rounding up children, going into schools and kidnapping them. And it gets virtually no coverage any longer in the United States and the European press.
It's true. It gets very little coverage. A couple of weeks ago in Kenya, there was a bus that was stopped by Muslim fanatics of al-Shabaab, and they forced everyone off the bus, and anyone who couldn't recite verses of the Quran was shot. Yeah. This got very little coverage in the United States. It is horrendous. In fact, what we're seeing here, this isn't really a political movement at all. This is a religious fanaticism. It reminds us of the Muslim hordes that swept across North Africa and into Spain. But it's much more brutal because it uses modern means of killing. We do need to be more sensitized. In fact, the President of the United States, to his credit, did pay attention to Africa, but it was always in terms of economics. And in fact, it's really to his shame that he was trying to tell African presidents to legalize homosexuality. Meanwhile, they're being murdered by Muslim fanatics. But we got to get our priorities straight. Religious freedom is one of the most basic facts of American life, and we should support religious freedom elsewhere.
Bill Donahue, speaking of fanaticism, there was a story that raged in the media in Ireland. This was in June, and this concerned mass graves found near a home for mothers and children run by a group of nuns. There were supposedly 800 bodies there. It ended up being a hoax. How did this thing get such traction? Bill Donahue.
Well, first of all, you had a local historian who said, well, there's 800 children. We can't find their graves. Well, hello, between 1925 and 1961, most of those children were, in fact, buried in unmarked graves. That was commonplace in Ireland. To assume that I can't account for the 800, therefore they're in a mass grave in a septic tank, is one heck of a leap. Now, when you have Martin Sixsmith behind it, of Philomena fame, and you got some other anti-Catholics working there, and of course, it's the nuns, isn't it? It's always the nuns in Ireland who are out there brutalizing people. Look, I read the McLeish report about the Magdalene laundries. There was almost none of the stuff that you've commented by Sixsmith and others is true. I looked in vain to read where all these reports of these horror stories and torture about these women and sexual abuse. There wasn't one woman in all the years there that was sexually abused. How do we know that? Well, the McLeish report is the most definitive document on it. And you know, when then you get the whole situation here with Galway, with the mass hoax, it's always of the same piece. The idea is that the Catholic Church basically doesn't believe in humanity. We're the ones out there persecuting them, and we allowed this to take place. We're not talking here about some exaggerations. We're talking about out-and-out lies. The one guy involved in the mass hoax thing, his name is Brian Sweeney, he said we can account for maybe 15 to 20 skeletons that we found in a grave. That's a pretty big difference between 800. And, of course, the media in this country beating the drum beats again. A lot of this was driven by bigotry. I spent an awful lot of time on it myself. And once it was debunked, look how quickly it moved away. But the people at Irish Central, who are strongly pro-Irish, and they're not exactly friends of Catholics, they helped to fan the flames in this country. Shame on them.
There were a lot of media missteps this year vis-a-vis the church. One that I think is emblematic of the symptom of the problem we've been seeing throughout the year was at the end of the year, the Pope Francis purportedly told a little boy that your dog will go to heaven. This became front-page news in the New York Times. What happened, and why do we keep seeing these misreports of what this man says or didn't say in this case?
You know, it's a very funny thing that the media is now operating in this sort of ideological fog is the only thing I can say. And it's not only regard to the Catholic Church. We've seen these stories recently about rapes at the University of Virginia and you know, other things that just seem to, they're supposed to confirm some sort of ideological myth. And I think that the myth of Francis is that he is so humane that he's now declared that dogs have souls and that the little boy doesn't have to. But it's really quite shocking that I think the story began with a misreport by the New York Times, of all places, which, in spite of its ideological orientation, you would at least think get the facts right. And there were no quotations, and there was nothing hard to get a grip on, and eventually it was repudiated, and let's hope goes away.
Yeah, it was attributed to Paul VI, and then it turned out he didn't say it, and it was a crazy story. Bill Donahue and Father Jerry, are we going to see more of this in the new year, particularly as Pope Francis comes here to the United States just before the Synod resumes?
Oh, we're going to see a lot more of it. The media loves to play fast and loose. Look, we all have good reasons to love Pope Francis, but you got a kind of a fawning going on here now, and people feel like, well, if he didn't say it exactly the way it's been reported, it's close enough and we can run with it. And again, what bothers me again is that Pope Francis has done some very good things to touch people. So did Benedict, and no one wants to give him any credit whatsoever. We've got the good Pope and the bad Pope. I think that kind of invidious comparison should end, but I think it's going to continue in 2015, regrettably.
Father Jerry, we'll give you the last word.
Well, it's going to be very interesting because the Pope will be coming to the United States, and with him comes all of the questions that the secular media and the secular people in the United States are always preoccupied. When is the Catholic Church going to change its doctrines? When are they going to ordain women? When are they going to authorize abortion, contraception? When are they going to accept homosexual activity? That's not why the Pope is coming here to do anything of that sort, but the impression is going to be given that that's what the Catholic Church needs to do. The real story is why are millions of people going to come out to see him is because America still is a very religious country at heart. We are concerned as a people with the ultimate destination of our soul. And Pope Francis is reminding people that there is a God in heaven who judges us. And in my opinion, that's the message we need to hear. The standards of politicians have to be submitted to a higher law, otherwise we live in a dictatorship.
Very good. We will leave it there for a moment. When we return, we'll look at the domestic front in the United States and Europe. Our world over. Year in Review, Year Ahead Special continues in a moment. Stay right there.
now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Year in Review, Year Ahead Special from Washington, D.C. I'm Raymond Arroyo, joined by Robert Royal, Father GERALD Murray, and Bill Donahue, who are sitting by in New York. The U.S. midterm elections were the big political story of the year. The Republicans swept in both the House and the Senate. Now, some saw this as a repudiation of President Obama, particularly Obamacare. What fueled the GOP takeover, in your opinion? I'll start with Bill Donahue.
Well, I think a lot of it had to do with there's kind of a libertarian streak going on in the country, which I'm not a libertarian, so I don't go along with them on a lot of these issues. But there is a revulsion against government, and you can see that played out in the Midwest. When you look at the way Kasich won handily and Walker again, stunning victories. You're talking 58, 65% of the vote. So there's that. Obviously, whenever you're in the second term of presidency, those midterm elections tend not to go your way. I think it goes way beyond Obamacare. I think there's a sense here. Look, Chuck Schumer, my senator, said it very well. He said nobody really wanted Obamacare. That was the problem. We made a mistake in going forward with that. They should have concentrated on the fundamentals of the economy, which only now are beginning to turn around. So I think there was a lot of enough is enough mixed in with a kind of a libertarian streak.
Robert Royal, this was a stunning sweep, though. I mean, you're talking 9 seats being picked up in the Senate for the GOP. Senator Mary Landrieu, longtime senator there, 18 years, loses her seat to a Republican challenger. Maryland, Arkansas, Illinois, Massachusetts, all those governor seats flipped, becoming Republican. What's going on?
Well, I think Bill has it basically right. I think there's a large movement in the world right now that's not exactly libertarian, but it's a sense that government and large-scale structures just don't work. You know, and as Catholics, we understand that some of these structures are put in place to promote solidarity, provide safety nets and whatnot, and those things need to be there. However, if there is any figure who sort of embodies activist government, you know, the government that is really the alternative to everything, that starts to do everything that the family and the church and the neighborhood and the town did in the past, it's the Democrats at this point. They're very ambitious, not only in terms of Obamacare, but you know, promising to be able to restart the economy, and it didn't work. Yeah. And lots of people feel threatened that there just seems to be too much intrusion everywhere they turn around in their lives at this point. So that's one, at least it seems to me that's the central part of what happened.
Father GERALD Murray, we keep hearing about the HHS mandate battle moving through the courts. The Little Sisters of the Poor have now gone to the 10th Circuit Court looking for relief. There have been various injunctions for Hobby Lobby and other business groups. Your thought on the impact of that ongoing battle and how that translated in the polling booth?
Well, I think the senators and others, they liked their jobs, but they couldn't keep them. The Americans liked their insurance, but they couldn't keep them. I mean, let's get real here. Politicians regularly misrepresent things, but this was so monumental. This is people were being sold a bill of goods. They felt disabused of that when they got the bills and when things happened. As regards treating the nuns, most people in this country, whether they're religious or not, do not believe that we should persecute nuns and other Catholics and religious people trying to do good. The Obama administration doesn't seem to be of that opinion. They're bullheaded about it. It displays, I think, a very secular view of life. Even if you're not religious, you should respect the origins of this country and our laws. So I think in the back of people's minds is dishonesty and anti-religious sentiment displayed in Washington needed to be cleaned out.
Robert Royal, I want to shift to Europe. We saw the rise of UKIP, the UKIP party, which is an alternative party to the right of the Conservative Party. 2 seats in the House of Commons, 3 seats in the House of Lords. Seems a similar reaction to what we saw here on Capitol Hill.
It's the reaction against the European Union being a sort of a very intrusive force everywhere, and one that doesn't do very well. I asked a person who actually had served in the European Parliament a little while ago what they actually do on a daily basis, and he says, well, you know, we make sure that the length of carrots is uniform throughout the various countries that belong to the EU, and you know, a few other things to try to impose these sort of progressive sexual and cultural things on the EU as a whole. So it goes back to the point I made before that I think around the world people are starting to feel that there's just too much centralization. And while that can be used for some good purposes, at least Catholics should understand the principle of subsidiarity, that we need diversity and we need local control over things.
Despite the congressional losses here in the United States, it was amazing to watch the president in the immediate aftermath sort of set the standard for the upcoming political season. And what the president did, he came out swinging and he announced an executive action that would stop the deportation of millions of immigrants, up to 5 million, and give them a path to citizenship, particularly parents of the so-called dreamers whom he relieved last time. The surge of minors across the southern border was a huge story in the summer. How will this play out in the new year, Father GERALD Murray?
Well, there's a very interesting question here for all of us is, are we a government of laws or of men? I mean, we have a system here where law is not mandated by one person, and that's why you have to go to the Congress and discuss it, and that's all to the good. Subsidiarity means that people have a say in what happens to them. I think immigration reform needs to happen, but so do a lot of people. What does that mean? You hash that out in debate. To short-circuit the system is not good. And I'm very sympathetic to people who want to immigrate to the United States. I'm a descendant of immigrants. Almost all of us are. But it has to be orderly and legal, and it has to be such that, you know, we don't invite criminals in and we don't do things to damage our nation. So I think we're in real trouble when the system that we have in the country is disregarded to gain political advantage, and reminds you of the way things are done in Latin America, not in the United States.
There is this tension, and we saw it emerge in April of this year when the U.S. bishops, some of the United States bishops, went and celebrated Mass at the border, the U.S.-Mexican border, as a show of support for immigration reform. This is a tough sell to the guy in the pew. Bill Donahue, what changes and what do you think will change this dynamic? Because the people in the pew are still opposed to amnesty, if you will, though they're open to dealing fairly with the people who are here, with these undocumented immigrants.
Well, I, for one, feel a sense of exasperation with both parties on this. I mean, let's face it, the Republicans want the labor and the Democrats want the votes. And I think both parties have failed us tremendously on this. The last time we had any comprehensive reform was in 1986. There's been no movement by this president or by the Republicans either. They both want to walk this walk, you know, trying to please everybody. I am very, very disheartened by what's happened. Now, you know, you can blame the president, but you also can blame the Republicans. Where was their bill? And all you ever got from people, a lot of talking heads at Fox, for example, would say, well, there's actually 6 or 7 bills. Well, you know what, fellas? Maybe you ought to give us one. And they don't want to give us one because they don't have anything on the table. And so the bishops, of course, are saying, listen, we have a humanitarian impulse here. We've got to reach out to these people who are needy. And as far as you guys are concerned, go figure out how to man your borders and the like. I really, like I said, I'm exasperated with both parties on this.
Robert Royal, do the bishops have a tough time in that such a large part of their annual budget comes from that huge government grant, $70 million annually, to the Migration and Refugee Services Program, so they actually benefit from having more migrants and refugees in country? Does that undermine their moral argument?
No, I don't think so. I agree with Bill that, you know, we've allowed people to be here for so long that the country now has a moral obligation toward people whose lives have been pretty much settled here. The trouble, it seems to me, and I've spoken to the bishops, have invited me to speak to them a couple of times about this issue. I've said to them, they tend to play down the question of law. And unfortunately, in circumstances like this, the law is one of the ways that we are fair toward people. At any given moment, there are 5 million people waiting in line legally to enter into the United States. Now, that said, I believe there should be a path towards citizenship. I just think people who have been here a long time, we've allowed this to happen. We've allowed their lives to become intertwined with ours. However, this has to be done via our legal system. Otherwise, we're in chaos. We're not a country that is a country that believes in the rule of law any longer. And I think a person who I will not name in the bishops' conference said to me, you know, illegals who have come here without permits, it's like jaywalking. Well, I'm afraid it's a little more serious than that.
Father Jerry Murray, what do your sense? How does the Church, if you will, reposition the argument? Because it doesn't seem to be working at the moment.
Well, you know, what is the argument? Is the argument about controlling the borders? Is it about increasing the number of legal visas each year?
The argument, the argument right now is we need to allow these people to come into the country. Whammo. And there's a pushback to that, by the way, from people who are naturalized immigrants to this country who waited a good long time and came in.
Sure. No, look, I believe in fair and square. You obey the law, you get the benefits. You violate the law, well, you run the risk. Now, it's up to the politicians to determine modalities and how many people we're going to process this way or another. But I don't think it's fair if you say those who violated the law get a free pass, those who are waiting online, you got to wait longer. That's not right. But as the two gentlemen have said, the Republican and Democrats have to do more. I agree with that. Yep.
No, I think we're all in agreement on that one. When we return, we'll look at the cultural environment. In 2014, we saw the return of the biblical epic in Hollywood. How'd that fare? The Ice Bucket Challenge and the selfie took over social media. And we'll look ahead to 2015 with predictions from the entire panel. The World Over Live Year in Review and Year Ahead continues in a moment. Don't go away.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to the World Over Year in Review, Year Ahead special from Washington, D.C. I'm joined by Robert Royal, Father GERALD Murray, and Bill Donahue, who are joining us from New York. 2014 saw a host of cultural trends take center stage. This was the year of the selfie, according to Twitter. Bill Donahue, did you take many selfies?
No, I don't have time for that nonsense. You know, but it was Christopher Lasch who wrote The Culture of Narcissism. It's only gotten worse since the man passed away. And so this is just kind of like the penultimate expression of it.
You're right. No, it's an endless loop of people taking pictures of themselves in front of whatever. We also saw this year the Ice Bucket Challenge, and this was, I thought, an amazing way to sort of dramatize and raise awareness for ALS and raise money. It did become something of a celebrity obligation at a certain point, did it not, Robert Royal?
I don't track these things as closely as you do.
Well, they're important, though, because people do them and they're watching.
I'm an old football player, and I remember when we used to dump stuff over coaches, and I never thought it was good back then, and I haven't changed my view.
So you did not take part in the Ice Bucket Challenge?
I didn't. No.
Father GERALD Murray, is there something here, though, for the Church to take note of, given its desire to evangelize? The fact is, this Ice Bucket thing was a massive tool of evangelization.
It really was, and it does show an altruistic side of American society that even if we're not very religious, we do think about those in need. And I think the Church should make a similar point. It also means we have to have a very sophisticated technology approach and launch mass campaigns. And EWTN is good at it, and other Catholic websites, the Catholic thing. But we have to do more of this, get people where they are and help them to realize that helping your fellow man does put you in good stead with God.
Yeah, and get them to do something. It was a neat visual that people could all partake in. It didn't take much time, and it reinforced the message. This year, Bill Donahue, I'll go to you on this one. We saw the return of the biblical epic, Son of God, When the Game Stands Tall, Heaven is for Real. All these movies made big money at the box office, considering they were basically smaller budget films. Then we saw Noah and Exodus, both of which did not do the business they expected, but they were sort of secular and agnostic takes on these biblical stories. There is a price to pay when Hollywood doesn't listen to the core audience it's seeking, yes?
Well, you know, I've been somewhat encouraged over the last few years because there is a religious appetite and Hollywood's beginning to notice. But like anything else, the people are not stupid. They want something to be artistically done in a good fashion as well. So you just can't just throw us a bone. But I do think the message has gotten through. I'm more encouraged now than I certainly was 10 years ago about the whole question of religion in Hollywood.
But now wait a minute, Bill. You went to war over Philomena, which got 4 Oscar nods.
Oh, yeah.
And the producers were really trying to manipulate the Pope and the Holy See, and they were very successful.
Yeah, I'm so happy to report that they didn't win, but they did try. The Weinstein brothers spent a small fortune trying to get there. All I'm saying is that religious-themed movies are are more acceptable to Hollywood today than they were 10 years ago, although the bashing obviously still continues.
I want to go right to predictions. The year 2015, your predictions for what we will see in it, and who would you nominate as the person of the year, Robert Royal?
I'm going to take on a very controversial subject.
Okay, this is the prediction.
This is my prediction. My prediction is that the committee that the Pope named to study the question of communion for divorced and remarried people is going to recommend that they receive communion. The Synod in October of 2015 is going to say no. And I'm not going to predict what the Holy Father is going to decide afterward, but he's going to be faced with a Paul VI-like situation. My person of the year is the Patriarch of Kirkuk in Iraq, who is
Louis Sacco.
Yes, Louis Sacco, who has been extremely brave himself and has called on his priests to come back and live and perhaps die with their people in Iraq, and has been calling on the West to do something very effective. I think he's one of the great heroic Catholics alive today, and he's in one of the most difficult circumstances in the world.
Well, he was a part of my person of the year, which was the persecuted Middle East Christians. So, okay.
We're on the same wavelength.
We're on the same wavelength, but you're much more specific than I. Father GERALD Murray, your predictions, and who would you say is the person of 2014?
Well, the Pope has announced that in February he's going to name some new cardinals. So I think in January there's going to be a set of people receiving phone calls who are going to be most shocked. They're going to be bishops who never expected to be named cardinal who will be. And then when that list goes public, I think we'll all be surprised. The Pope is unpredictable. He named a cardinal from Haiti in the last round. I think we're going to see a lot of interesting men being promoted. My person of the year is persons, and it's the Little Sisters of the Poor that we spoke about earlier. I really have to admire this group of nuns. They are true servants of the poor. We have them here in the Archdiocese of New York. They run a magnificent nursing home in the Bronx. They're also over in Long Island. They have held firm. And for me, this is, you know, the poor of the world do instruct the powerful. They have said that they are not going to compromise their faith in Jesus Christ for any reason. And if the government gets in the way, they're going to say no. So God bless those sisters. I think we all know the administration is up against a power that they cannot conquer, and the Little Sisters represent that power.
They're amazing nuns. Bill Donahue, you get the last prediction, and who do you think is the person or persons of the year? Bill Donahue.
Well, I think doctor-assisted suicide is going to become the new abortion issue. I'm not particularly sanguine. I think the bishops are going to have to really have an opportunity to speak out more and more. That libertarian streak, which I mentioned before, in this particular case, don't count me with the libertarians on this. It's a very serious issue, and I think the disabled are going to have to speak up as well as the bishops on this issue. I see it gaining momentum to the point where it will at least rival abortion. And when it comes to the persons of the year, I got to go with Megyn Kelly and Laura Ingraham because they've shown the kind of fortitude a lot of the boys haven't shown, and they are a voice of moral clarity.
We'll leave it there. Let me give my prediction. I'll give my prediction. My prediction is very simple. Pope Francis seems to be indicating in interviews and in homilies that he means to change the church discipline on communion for divorced and remarried Catholics. Now, many will make the case that this is not a change of doctrine, and I think an equally voracious majority will make the argument that it is. The Synod in October may be smoother than its predecessor, but the reaction outside the hall will be anything but. Robert, I'll go a little step further than you. I think the Pope is going to make a change on this issue. He's been indicating it in every possible way, as recently as a homily just before Christmas. Before we go, in 2014, we experienced a great loss within the EWTN family. Father Benedict Groeschel, the founder of the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, passed away in October. Father Groeschel, of course, was a fixture on EWTN from the very beginning. I was surprised by the muted reaction to his passing. Father Jerry Murray, your thoughts? You knew him.
He taught me in the seminary. I went to his funeral. Father Benedict was a great figure in the Church in the United States during our lifetime, and he suffered at the end. He bore that suffering well. Father Benedict represents what a Franciscan really is, someone who represents God 100%, and I think most people in the United States who ever saw him on TV were touched.
Bill Donahue, very quickly.
I love them very much. I think he got an unfair rap because of some untoward comments that he made, which could easily be misconstrued. Take a look at the totality of the man. I am not happy about the way he was treated by some people, and he didn't get the support of a lot of good guys on our side.
Bill Donahue, Father Jerry Murray, thank you for joining us from New York.
Thank you.
Robert Royal, last word on Father Benedict Groeschel.
I love the man. We did a lot of different projects together. I think one of the amazing things about him is that the way he suffered after that terrible car accident that he was in, and the way he handled it afterward, in spite of the controversies that Bill was talking about, he kind of gave us an example of how to die. In much the same way that John Paul II did, when your body is decaying, but that spirit is still strong.
And how to live. He went out and founded that incredible order. This very night, they are feeding the homeless. They are bringing in drug addicts and people on the street, giving them love and attention. They're a great order, the Franciscan Friars of the Renewal, in New York, in London, all over the world now. It's really a great legacy. Robert Royal, thank you.
Good to be there.
That concludes our review and look ahead to the year to come. We thank you all for joining us, and as always, we do this for you each week. We thank you for allowing us to be a part of your lives. It's an honor to share the world with you each and every week. Until next time, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. Big year coming. You can also sign up for my free e-blast at RaymondArroyo.com. Let me know what you thought of tonight's show. In the meantime, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. We'll see you in this new year. Bye now.